The glass door of the Silver Moon Diner swings open at exactly 3:22 in the morning, and the woman who stumbles through it looks like she has been assembled from broken things. Aria Wells, 29 years old but wearing the exhaustion of someone twice that age, collapses against the laminate counter with a sound like a wounded animal giving up the fight. Her shoulder-length brown hair clings to her pale face in wet strands, matted with sweat and blood. Her left eye is swollen nearly shut, the skin around it already darkening into shades of purple and black. Her coat hangs torn at the shoulder, and beneath the rip, scarred skin is visible, a roadmap of old violence written across her back. Her hand shakes so violently that the $5 bill she clutches flutters to the black and white checkered floor like a dying bird. Blood seeps from a gash above her left eye, dripping in slow, deliberate drops onto the white counter. Drip. 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 The rhythm of it echoes in the silence. The diner smells like stale coffee and bacon grease, the kind of smell that has seeped into every surface and will never leave. Neon lights buzz overhead, casting a sickly pink and blue glow across everything, turning the white walls the color of a bruise. In the corner booth, 3 men in dark suits go absolutely still. Vincent Moretti sits with his back to the wall, as men like him always do. He is 42 years old, with salt and pepper hair that catches the neon light like it cost money to look that way. It probably did. His eyes are a shade of grey that seems to hold no light at all, only to give it back transformed into something predatory. He watches the bleeding woman at the counter the way a hunter watches prey that does not yet know it has been spotted. Beside him, Rocco shifts slightly, his broad shoulders tensing under his tailored suit, his hand freezing halfway to his coffee cup. On his other side, Theo leans back, a lean man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, smoke curling from the cigarette between his fingers in a way that seems almost deliberate, almost performed. Aria does not notice them. She cannot notice anything except that her hands will not stop shaking. Her voice comes out cracked, barely a whisper, like something that has been broken and glued back together poorly. Coffee. Black. Please. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that says Denise, stares at her for a long moment before moving. She does not ask questions. Not in New York. Not at 3 in the morning. Not when someone is bleeding. Aria's coat falls open as she reaches for the counter to steady herself, and the edge of a folded envelope becomes visible in her pocket. The paper is cream-colored, official-looking, and stamped with red ink that screams like a silent alarm. Eviction notice. 12 days. The words are small, but they might as well be printed on her skin. 2 hours earlier, in an alley behind a convenience store on Amsterdam Avenue, everything was different and exactly the same. The boy could not have been more than 16. His name was Marcus, and he was running from something. The 3 men who cornered him against the brick wall were running toward violence, which is a different thing entirely. One of them held a switchblade, the kind that catches light and throws it back like a weapon. The blade gleamed. The boy's eyes were wide and liquid with fear. He pressed himself harder against the wall, as if he could disappear into the brick itself. That was when Aria stepped forward from the darkness. She was not thinking. Thinking is what people do when they have calculated the cost of their actions and decided the payment was worth the purchase. Aria had not calculated anything. 8 years of buried rage, 8 years of bruises turning colors, 8 years of being told she was worthless and small and deserving of everything that happened to her, all of it rose up in her chest like a fire that no amount of water could extinguish. Her voice came out cold and steady and absolutely certain. Leave him alone. The 3 men laughed. Laughter is a terrible sound when it belongs to people who hurt others for amusement. Then Harold Brennan emerged from the shadows, and the laughter stopped being funny at all. Harold was 38 years old and wore cruelty the way other men wear cologne. His designer jacket cost more than Aria had made in 3 months. His hands were large and precise, the hands of someone who had practiced hurting people until it became a language he spoke fluently. When he smiled at Aria, it was the smile of someone who had already won, already decided what would happen next, already written the ending in his mind. Aria. Still playing hero. His voice was smooth and dark, like honey poured over broken glass. She did not flinch. That was her mistake and her greatest strength all at once. Harold's fist connected with her face like a hammer. Her head snapped back. Pain exploded behind her eyes, white and blinding and all-consuming. She went down to the concrete, scraping her palms raw, feeling the shock of impact travel through her bones. Blood filled her mouth. The taste of it, copper and salt, made her want to scream, but screaming gives people satisfaction, so she did not scream. She got back up. I said, "Leave him alone." Her voice was shattered glass now, barely held together. The boy ran. Marcus ran into the night, and maybe he made it home, and maybe he did not. Aria would never know. That was not her story to follow. What happened instead was that Harold hit her again, and the switchblade boy held her arms, and the third man took his turn, and through it all, Aria did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus when she was 19 years old and had nowhere left to run. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that across the street, from the window of a black sedan with tinted glass, a man was watching. Vincent Moretti had been waiting for a different meeting that night. A betrayal, perhaps. A business dispute. Something that required his personal attention and his cold, precise judgment. Instead, he saw the woman in the alley. He saw her step between three men and certain violence. He saw her take the beating and stand again. He saw something that could not be taught, something that burned in people and either consumed them or made them powerful enough to move mountains. He saw her, and something in his chest shifted like tectonic plates rearranging themselves. Back in the Silver Moon Diner, at 3:22 in the morning, Vincent Moretti's eyes narrow as recognition flickers across his face. It is a small gesture, barely visible, but Rocco knows him well enough to catch it. Rocco's entire body goes still in a way that suggests he is translating a language that only they speak. "Rocco." Vincent's voice is deep and solid like an oath. "The woman from the alley." Rocco does not answer immediately. He simply nods, and in that nod lives entire conversations, entire years of loyalty and understanding and the knowledge that something has changed, though neither of them can yet articulate what. Theo, still smoking his cigarette, turns his head slowly, and his eyes move across Aria Wells with new interest, the way a collector of rare things examines something that has just arrived in his possession. Aria does not hear them. She is counting her $5 on the counter, smoothing each crumpled bill with hands that will not stop shaking. $5. That is the total sum of her remaining resources in the world. $5 and 12 days before the eviction notice becomes a legal document that erases her from the apartment where she has lived with her daughter for 2 years. $5 and a past that follows her like a disease with no cure. $5 and a future that looks like living in her car, if she still had a car, which she does not. The coffee arrives. It is hot and black and smells like hope and lies, because coffee cannot actually fix anything, but it smells like it might, and sometimes that is enough for a few minutes. Denise sets it down gently, with the kind of tenderness that comes from recognizing pain in another person. "On the house," she says, and Aria's eyes burn with tears that she will not let fall. "Thank you," Aria whispers. What changed everything was this: Vincent Moretti stood up from his corner booth, buttoned his suit jacket with deliberate precision, and walked toward the counter. His movements were controlled, economical, the movements of a man who had never wasted energy in his entire life. Every step was calculated. Every gesture spoke of power and authority and the certainty of someone who moves through the world knowing that it will bend to accommodate him. He sat down on the stool next to Aria Wells, and for a moment, the entire diner held its breath. This would be the last night she remained invisible. Now, let us go back to the beginning, to understand how a woman with nothing became the person who would change everything. 14 months earlier, on a day when the sky was the color of wet concrete and the November wind cut through the city like a blade wrapped in ice, Aria Wells stood in a cemetery holding her 5-year-old daughter's hand. The child wore a black dress from a discount store, a size too large, and she did not understand why Mommy was crying without making any sound. Aria's other hand held a funeral program with her husband's photograph on the front. Daniel Wells. Age 32. Beloved husband and father. The words felt like they belonged to someone else's life, someone else's tragedy, not this, not the hollow sensation in her chest, not the small hand squeezing hers so tightly it cut off the circulation, not the debt that was already beginning to form like a tumor in her mind. The casket was lowered into the ground. A priest said words that Aria did not hear because she was doing the mathematics of survival in her head. 3 days in intensive care. $65,000. The number appeared in her mind in the same red ink that would later appear on an eviction notice. $65,000. More money than she had earned in her entire life. More money than she would earn in the next 10 years if she worked every single day without stopping. Daniel's employer had called it an accident. Operator error. A miscalculation. A tragedy. They offered nothing. No insurance. No death benefits. Just the hospital bill, growing with interest, a living thing that would follow her through the years like a curse. Mrs. Chen from the apartment next door stood beside them, her weathered hand resting on Aria's shoulder. She was 63, a widow herself, and she understood the language of loss in a way that did not require explanation. When the service ended, Mrs. Chen drove them home. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like fried food and broken dreams. 2 bedrooms. $390 a month. Aria had signed the lease 2 years ago when Daniel was alive, when the future seemed like something that would happen to other people, not to them. Ava fell asleep on the couch at 7 in the evening. She was still wearing the black dress. Aria did not change her. She sat on the kitchen floor with the hospital bills spread around her like tarot cards predicting a future of endless debt. $65,000. She had no inheritance. No savings. Her mother had died when she was 16, and her father was the reason Aria understood that the world could turn violent without warning. His belt. His fists. The scars on her back that ran in every direction like a map of hell. She had never told Daniel about those scars. She had hidden them under clothes and silence and the fierce determination that she would never, ever become a woman who accepted violence as the price of survival. But Daniel was dead. 6 months after the funeral, the debt collectors began calling at 7 in the morning. The first call woke Aria from a nightmare about drowning. The voice on the phone was male, casual, almost friendly. "Ms. Wells, we are here to discuss your account." By the 3rd month, the calls came twice a day. By the 6th month, they came 3 times. Aria worked her first job as a maid at the Grand View Hotel on 5th Avenue, where she cleaned rooms occupied by people who spent more on a single meal than she earned in a week. She saw things in those rooms. She saw silk nightgowns abandoned on marble floors. She saw jewelry left on nightstands. She saw the casual excess of people who had never counted money because it was not necessary. At 2 in the afternoon, she would finish her shift, take the subway across the city, and report to her second job, cleaning office buildings after dark. She scrubbed toilets. She emptied trash cans. She mopped floors that reflected the lights of the city at night, 1,000 windows showing a world she was not part of. She came home at 2 in the morning to find Ava asleep on the couch, Mrs. Chen dozing in the armchair, waiting. Every night the same. Every morning the same. The exhaustion lived in her bones now, a permanent resident. She was 28 years old, but her body moved like a woman of 50. 3 months after she started her second job, the eviction notice appeared under her door. 60 days to vacate. The rent had not been paid in 2 months because there was no money. The day care for Ava cost $300 a week. The food cost another $100. The utilities. The bus fare. The medications for the chest pain that had started 6 months after Daniel died. 3 months later, another notice arrived. 30 days. The red ink seemed brighter this time, more violent. She stood in her apartment, reading it, feeling the walls begin to compress. Ava was at school. Mrs. Chen was at work. Aria was alone in the space that was no longer hers, and the future had stopped being something that might happen and had become something that was happening right now. It was on a Tuesday in late August when Harold Brennan first approached her at the Grandview Hotel. She was pushing a cleaning cart down the hallway on the 3rd floor, her shoulders aching, when she saw him standing in front of room 317. He wore an Italian suit that cost more than her monthly rent. He was 42 years old but had the posture of a man who had never experienced a moment of self-doubt. His dark hair was slicked back. His smile was bright and practiced. "Excuse me," he said. "I was wondering if you could help me with something." His tone suggested that helping him was a privilege. Aria had learned to recognize this tone. She heard it from hotel guests every day. She helped him. He asked for fresh towels. She brought towels. He asked for the temperature of the room adjusted. She adjusted it. The next day, he was still there. Room 317. He asked her to join him for dinner. She said no. He asked her the next day. She said no again. On the 4th day, he said, "You look like you need to smile." She had smiled. It felt like moving a muscle that had atrophied. The dinner was at a restaurant with white tablecloths and candlelight. He paid for everything. He listened to her talk about Ava, about Daniel, about the debt that was destroying her. His hand reached across the table and covered hers. "You've been through so much," he said, his voice like honey mixed with something darker. "You need someone to take care of you." She believed him because she was desperate. Because she had been alone for so long. Because grief had made her soft and stupid and willing to let someone else carry some of the weight. The second date ended with his hand around her wrist in his car. Too tight. Not an accident. "I don't like being dismissed, Aria," he said, his voice still sweet. "When I ask you to spend time with me, you say yes. Do you understand?" She understood. She tried to end it the next day. She texted him, "I don't think this is working." He arrived at her apartment at midnight, pounding on the door with the force of someone used to doors opening when he demanded they open. Mrs. Chen called the police. 2 officers arrived within 10 minutes. They were Officer Martinez and Officer Kim. Harold smiled at them. Shook their hands. "Officers, good to see you. A little misunderstanding with the lady here. Nothing serious." Officer Martinez looked at Aria, who was standing in the doorway in her pajamas, fear written across her face. "Is that right?" he asked. "She's just a little emotional. Ex-husband drama, you know how it is." Harold spoke with the confidence of a man who had spoken to police officers before, who understood how to move through the world with impunity. The officers left. Harold whispered at her through the closed door, "You don't get to leave me." The violence started that night. He forced his way in. His hand around her throat. Ava crying in the bedroom. The sound of her daughter's screams is a sound that Aria will never unhear, a sound that lives in her body like shattered glass, cutting from the inside. For the next 8 months, Harold Brennan was a constant threat. He would appear at her work and get her fired. She lost the housekeeping job at the Grandview, then the office cleaning contract. He would wait outside Ava's school. He would text her at 3 in the morning, "Thinking of you. Thinking about your body." Those scars. He had discovered the scars on her back, old scars, from her father, from before Daniel. Harold weaponized them. "Damaged goods," he whispered into her ear. "No one else will ever want you. You're lucky I do." Sophie Langford entered the story 8 months after the funeral, though she had always been part of Harold's orbit. She was wealthy in a way that felt effortless. 45 years old. Blonde hair cut in a style that cost $400. Clothes that she wore once and discarded. She took pleasure in destruction the way other people took pleasure in art. When Harold introduced her as his business partner, Sophie smiled at Aria with the warmth of a predator assessing prey. "Oh, I've heard so much about you," Sophie said. Her eyes were the color of ice water. "Harold mentioned you're in hotel management." Aria had not claimed to be in hotel management. She said nothing. Sophie continued, I have friends at the Grand View. Very good friends. I'm sure I could put in a word. But the word Sophie put in was not a good one. It was a rumor. A lie? She called the hotel and told them that Aria had been stealing from guests. She sent emails with forged evidence to every cleaning service in the city. By the end of September, no one would hire her. No agency. No private employer. She was marked as unreliable, as a thief, as dangerous. Sophie did this with the precision of someone who had learned that cruelty could be an art form. She seemed to enjoy it more than Harold's crude violence. At least violence could be resisted. At least violence could be reported. But this systematic destruction, this erasure of Aria's ability to earn money, to feed her child, this was elegant in its lethality. By mid-November, 2 weeks before the night Aria would sit in a fluorescent-lit diner with $5 in her pocket, she had reached the bottom. The final eviction notice had been delivered. 12 days. Written in red ink. She had been fired from her last cleaning job 3 days after Sophie's call. There was no money for food. She was eating the leftovers from restaurant bins, Ava eating only during school lunch. The debt had grown to $67,000 with penalties and interest. On a Tuesday morning, Harold sent a text message, "You'll come back to me. You always do. You're nothing without me." Aria read it in the darkness of her apartment while Ava slept. She looked at her daughter's small body curled on the couch, the only bed available in the apartment. She thought of her father's belt. She thought of Daniel in the hospital, the monitors beeping their countdown to nothing. She thought of the scars on her back and the new scars forming on her heart. And in that moment, something in her crystallized. Not hope, she was too broken for hope. But something like defiance. A small, fierce refusal to accept that she and her daughter would disappear. That they would become invisible. That Harold Brennan would be right. She did not have a plan. She did not have money. She did not have power or connections or any of the things that might save her. But she had the fierce, reckless courage of someone who had already lost everything and was willing to lose it again if it meant her daughter might survive. She left the apartment and walked through the freezing November night, not knowing where she was going, only knowing that she would not stay where Harold could find her. The diner appeared through the darkness like a beacon. The fluorescent lights hummed their dying song as Aria Wells pushed through the diner door at 3:22 in the morning. Winter air clung to her coat like a curse, and blood, still wet, still warm, traced a line from her eyebrow to her cheekbone. Her hands trembled so violently she could barely grip the counter. $5. That was all that remained in her pocket. $5 and 12 days until the eviction notice, written in red ink, became final. Dottie, the night waitress, looked up from her crossword puzzle and froze. 40 years working the graveyard shift at Murphy's Diner had taught her to recognize many things: drunk businessmen, lost teenagers, lonely widows nursing coffee until dawn. But she had never seen desperation quite like this. Aria sat at the counter, careful to keep her bleeding side away from the vinyl seat. Every movement sent sharp pain across her ribs. She had been running for 3 weeks. Running from Harold Brennan, from his fists, from his promises that she would always come back to him because she was nothing without him. Running from the cops who would not file reports because Harold knew precinct captains in 3 districts. Running from Sophie Langford's careful, methodical destruction of her name, her employment, her ability to survive. But tonight she had stopped running long enough to stand. 2 hours earlier, she had witnessed Harold and 2 men cornering a teenager outside a convenience store on Amsterdam Avenue. The boy was maybe 17, terrified, bleeding from a split lip. And something in Aria, something forged in 8 years of absorbing blows meant for others, 8 years of swallowing her voice, had crystallized into pure, reckless rage. She had stepped between them. "Stop," she had said. Just one word. Her voice did not even shake. Harold's face had gone purple with fury. "You do not get to tell me anything." But he had hesitated. And in that hesitation, a man emerged from the shadows of the alley, tall, dark-haired, moving with a kind of deliberate calm that made danger feel inevitable. He had looked at Harold with eyes like storm clouds before a hurricane, and something in his expression had made Harold's hands fall away from the teenager's jacket. The man had not spoken. He simply stood there, waiting, as if he had all the time in the world for Harold Brennan to make a choice he would regret. Harold had left. The teenager had run. And Aria, her coat torn, bleeding, had found herself alone with the stranger who had somehow saved her without lifting a hand. "You should get that looked at," he had said, gesturing to her eye. "I don't know you." "No," he had agreed. "But I know what you just did." Then he had walked away, disappearing into the November darkness like he had never existed at all. Now, in the diner, Aria pressed a napkin to her bleeding eyebrow and tried not to think about what would happen when Harold found her. Because he would find her. He always did. Dottie set down a cup of coffee without asking. "On the house," she said. Aria shook her head. "I can't. I don't have. Honey, someone paid your tab already. Paid for anything you want to eat tonight." Dottie's voice was kind in a way that made Aria want to cry, which meant she absolutely would not cry, because crying was a luxury she could no longer afford. Aria's hand steadied just slightly around the warm cup. Across the street, in a parked black SUV with tinted windows, Vincent Moretti sat in the back seat and watched the diner through a gap in the curtains. The cold leather seat conformed to his body, the way everything in his world conformed to his will. Rocco sat in the driver's seat, engine off, patience infinite. Theo occupied the passenger side, scrolling through his phone, pulling up photographs. "Aria Wells," Theo said quietly. Age 28. Widow. Daughter, Ava, age 6. Worked at the Grand View until last week. Fired. Eviction notice filed 4 days ago. 12 days to vacate. Debt is $65,000 with penalties and interest. Vincent did not take his eyes off the diner. The man who hit her is named Harold Brennan. Connected to precinct captains in 3 districts. Untouchable through normal channels. Domestic disturbance calls in her history, 5 filed, 0 arrests made. Someone has been protecting him. And the other one. Vincent's voice came out like ice cracking under weight. Theo flipped to another photo. Sophie Langford. Age 34. Divorced, wealthy family money. Works in finance, but her real business is information. She made calls 3 days ago, to the Grand View, to 3 other employers Aria had applied to. Spread word that Aria was unstable, unreliable, potentially stealing from previous positions. Deliberately, Vincent said. Not a question. Deliberately, Theo confirmed. Building a case for Aria to lose custody of her daughter. The goal appears to be total isolation. Vincent's jaw tightened, the scar along his left cheekbone deepening as the muscle worked beneath his skin. 3 years ago, his own brother Marco had betrayed him to the Castellano family. 3 years, and Vincent had rebuilt the empire from nothing, earning back territory with patience and violence in equal measure. He had learned to trust no one, to keep distance as if it were a weapon. 15 years since Rocco and Theo had joined him, and they had never seen him break protocol, never seen him show preference or mercy or anything resembling vulnerability. Until tonight. A woman with $5 in her pocket had stepped between armed men and a stranger. She had not known who Vincent was. She had not known that the teenager was connected to a rival family, that protecting the boy would have shifted alliances in ways that mattered to the balance of power in Lower Manhattan. She had simply seen danger and chosen to bleed rather than look away. Vincent stood. The car was cold, the kind of cold that came from winter and from him, the way cold simply arrived wherever Vincent Moretti was present. "We're leaving," he said. The meeting with Rocco began. "Cancel it." Rocco exchanged a look with Theo. In 15 years, Vincent Moretti had never cancelled a meeting. Before leaving, Vincent left instructions with a night manager at Murphy's Diner, $500 cash, paid to the owner, with explicit instructions that Aria Wells could order anything she wanted for the next week. No questions. No disclosure of who paid. The black SUV pulled away from the curb in silence. In the diner, Aria wrapped her hands around the warm cup and did not know that she was being watched by the most powerful man in New York City. Did not know that Vincent Moretti had just made a decision that would quietly reshape her entire life. Did not know that his protection would come with a cost she had not yet learned to calculate. 3 weeks passed in silence. The eviction deadline arrived and then vanished. 1 month's rent appeared in Aria's account through her landlord, who shrugged when she asked questions. Someone paid it. Don't ask. Don't tell. That's the rule. Aria accepted it because she was desperate enough to accept miracles, even the ones that terrified her. She found work through a cleaning agency that suddenly had an opening. For nights in, while mopping the 10th floor of a private office building in Lower Manhattan, she heard voices through a closed door. An argument in Italian. A man pleading. Vincent's voice, calm and absolutely merciless, "You borrowed $300,000. You have 48 hours to return it, or I will take it from your family." Aria froze, mop suspended in her hands. The door opened. A man rushed past her, face white. Rocco appeared in the hallway, saw her, and their eyes met for a single moment. "10th floor is finished for tonight," he said. "Go home to your daughter." Aria ran. 1 week later, the protection Vincent had offered in silence became protection he offered aloud. She was leaving Ava's school at 3:15 in the afternoon when Harold appeared across the street, hands jammed in his coat pockets, watching. Her heart stopped. She took Ava's hand and walked quickly toward the subway, but Harold followed. His footsteps echoed behind hers. She turned down a side street, planning to circle back, and he was suddenly there, grabbing her arm, slamming her against brick. Ava screamed. "You think you can ignore me?" Harold's breath came hot and stinking of whiskey. His hand wrapped around Aria's throat, cutting off air. "You think some mystery payment means you're free from me?" Aria clawed at his hand, gasping, stars beginning to bloom at the edges of her vision. Then a voice, calm and cold as winter stone, let her go. Harold turned. Vincent Moretti stood at the alley entrance, alone, hands in the pockets of a black wool coat that cost more than everything Aria had owned in the last 5 years. Frost glittered on his shoulders where winter sun caught the fabric. His face was composed, patient, the way someone is patient when they are waiting for something inevitable. Harold laughed. "Who the hell are you?" Vincent did not answer. He simply looked at Harold with the kind of stillness that precedes violence, not threatened violence, but violence that has already been decided upon and is simply waiting for the proper moment to be executed. Harold's smile faltered. He recognized power when he saw it. He released Aria, stepped back, hands raised. "This isn't over," he said. "Vincent, yes. It is." Harold left, but the look he shot Aria promised retribution that would come when Vincent's protection could not shield her. Aria collapsed against the wall, pulling Ava close, her daughter's small body shaking against her chest. Vincent approached slowly, crouched to Ava's level, his movements careful, deliberate, the way a man soothed a frightened animal. "Are you hurt?" he asked her. Ava shook her head, wide-eyed, watching this man who seemed to be made of the same material as the winter sky. Vincent stood and looked at Aria. "You need protection." "I need to disappear," Aria said, her voice raw from the pressure of his hand. "Who are you?" "Someone who saw what you did in that alley 3 weeks ago," Vincent said. "You stepped between armed men and a stranger." "Why?" Recognition flashed across Aria's face. This was the man from that night. This was the man who had made Harold's hands fall away. "Because no one stopped them when I needed it," Aria said. The truth of her childhood hung between them like a ghost. Vincent stepped closer. "Come with me. There is a place you and your daughter can stay. Safe." "I don't take charity," Aria said. "I am not offering charity. I am offering employment. My home needs someone trustworthy. You clean, you cook, you live there with your daughter. $60,000 per year." Aria's breath caught. $60,000 a year. That was more than she had earned in the last 2 years combined. Why would you help me? I am nobody, she said. Vincent's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes, a recognition of something in her that matched something in him. You are someone who stood when you should have run. That is not nobody. Aria looked at Ava, then back at Vincent. She should say no. She should run. Instead, she thought of the eviction notice that would not disappear, of Harold's hands, of the debt that grew larger every day like a living thing consuming her future. When do we start? That same evening, in an upscale bar in Midtown with white marble and amber lighting, Sophie Langford sipped a martini and listened as Harold described the man in the expensive coat. Sophie went pale. Vincent Moretti, she said. You idiot. You just challenged a Mafia boss. I don't care who he is. Aria is mine, Harold said. Sophie set down her glass with careful precision. Then we need to be smarter. Moretti protects her directly, we are dead. But if we destroy her completely, make her a liability to him, he will drop her like everyone else does. People like him do not protect people who become problems. They began to plot. Sophie would spread rumors that Aria was stealing from Vincent, selling information to rivals. Harold would use his cop connections to build a case, fabricate evidence that Aria was mentally unstable, unfit. They would file for custody of Ava, isolate her so completely that even Vincent's protection would become a cage rather than a shelter. The next morning, Aria and Ava moved into Vincent's brownstone in Lower Manhattan. The home was massive, elegant, dark wood and leather furniture, with tall windows overlooking the park. Ava ran through the rooms, eyes huge, while Rocco and Theo watched from the background with obvious suspicion. Theo muttered to Rocco, "Boss never brings anyone here. Ever. Rocco, in 15 years, I have never seen him like this." Aria was given a suite on the 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms, a private bathroom, her own entrance. When Ava saw the windows, she pressed her face against the glass. "Mommy, I can see the park." Aria stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed by space and safety in equal measure. Vincent appeared in the doorway. "You are safe here. No one will touch you." Aria turned to face him fully for the first time, and she saw past the danger to the man beneath, the scar along his jaw, the exhaustion in his eyes that mirrored her own, the careful distance he maintained as if he had forgotten how to be close to anyone. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. Vincent paused. "Because I know what it is to be betrayed by someone you trusted. I will not let it happen to you again." He left before she could respond. But what Aria did not know was that her presence in Vincent's home had already made her a target, and Sophie Langford was 3 steps into a plan that would force her to reveal scars she had hidden for 8 years. Within days, the rumors would begin. Within weeks, she would face a choice she never imagined: run again, or stand and fight. The brownstone's kitchen fell into absolute silence at 2:27 in the morning. Aria Wells stood at the marble counter, custody papers spread before her like a death sentence written in legal language, her hands trembling so violently that the words blurred into meaningless symbols. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago. The document's title line read, "Emergency Custody Evaluation, Aria Wells, deemed unfit," and beneath it, in official stamps and signatures, was Harold Brennan's handwriting, his lies formalized into weapons that could strip Ava from her arms forever. She had survived the diner at 3:22 a.m. She had survived Harold's fists. She had survived 8 years of invisible scars mapping her back like a geography of pain. But this was different. This was institutional, methodical, unstoppable. Upstairs, Ava slept in a room with wallpaper printed with stars, a room Vincent Moretti had furnished 3 weeks ago with furniture that cost more than Aria's entire childhood. The girl had finally stopped having nightmares. Her laugh had returned, that small, bell-like sound that Aria had thought might be lost forever. The custody hearing was scheduled for 1 week from today. Aria lowered herself into a chair, the document shaking in her grip. The evidence was damning because it was constructed with precision. Harold had filed false police reports claiming she had been hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation, a claim that never happened. Sophie Langford had purchased testimony from a psychologist named Dr. Raymond Price, a man with financial problems and no ethical backbone, who stated in his report that Aria displayed signs of emotional instability, paranoid ideation, and potential danger to minors. The report was dated and sealed with official credentials. The custody application cited her homelessness, her financial instability, her employment history showing gaps and poor performance reviews that Sophie had fabricated through her network of corporate connections. It painted a portrait of a woman unraveling, a woman incapable of protecting a child, a woman who should never have been granted primary custody in the first place. It was, in every legal sense, devastating. Aria heard footsteps on the marble floor before she heard Vincent's voice. He had learned to move through the brownstone at night, checking on her and Ava without making it obvious, his lieutenants long since noting that their boss had developed a pattern that broke decades of precedent. Men in his position did not check on housekeepers at 3 in the morning. Men in his position did not care whether those housekeepers slept or suffered. Vincent Moretti appeared in the kitchen doorway, still dressed in the charcoal suit he had worn to meet with the Castellano family that evening, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the dark hair on his chest and the silver chain he always wore, a pendant his mother had blessed the day before she died of cancer, 34 years ago. His eyes were storm gray, penetrating, but they softened when they landed on her face. "You should be sleeping," he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. Aria did not look up. She could not. Looking at him while her world collapsed felt like asking him to shoulder weight that was not his to carry. Vincent crossed the kitchen in 4 measured steps and sat across from her without asking permission. He read the document in silence, his jaw tightening with each page. When he finished, he folded it precisely and set it on the counter between them. "Harold Brennan filed this," he said. It was not a question. Harold and Sophie. Together. Aria's voice was barely a whisper, shattered like glass. "They are destroying me systematically. The psychological evaluation is fabricated. The employment reviews are lies. The police reports never happened. But none of that matters because I cannot afford a lawyer who can prove any of it." Vincent's hands curled into fists on the table. "You are not alone anymore. I am still alone in court. Legal system does not care about truth, Mr. Moretti. It cares about documentation and credentials and money." Aria finally looked at him, her eyes hollow with despair. "Sophie has all 3. I have nothing." Vincent stood and walked to the window overlooking the park. October moonlight cut across his profile, illuminating the scar running from his eye to his cheekbone, a scar from a knife fight when he was 23, defending his younger brother from a rival family's retaliation. His brother had died anyway, 5 years later, from a bullet meant for Vincent. Family was a blade wrapped in ice. "Tell me everything," Vincent said quietly. "Not the version you have told yourself. The truth." Aria's breathing became shallow. No one had ever asked her to do this. Not her mother, who preferred silence and complicity. Not the 3 friends she had trusted with fragments of the story, who eventually decided her pain was too heavy to carry. Not even the therapist she had seen for 6 sessions before Harold discovered the appointment and made her stop. She stood and turned her back to him. Her hands moved to the hem of her sweater, the grey one she wore most nights because it was warm and forgiving, and she lifted it above her shoulders. The scars began at her lower back and spread upward, a cartography of hell rendered in damaged skin. Some were thin and surgical-looking, the result of precision. Others were wider, more chaotic, the result of rage. Her father's belt buckle had created some. His fists had created others. 8 years of Harold's hands had added fresh marks, layered over the old, a palimpsest of violence. Aria did not turn to see Vincent's face. She could not bear to watch his expression shift into pity or disgust or the terrible, unbearable weight of responsibility. "I was 14 when my father started," she said, her voice steady now, hollowed out by the ritual of speaking. "My mother knew. She covered for him. She told me I must have done something to provoke him. When I turned 17, I ran. I worked as a maid in a hotel, made minimum wage, lived in a basement room with 3 other women. I thought I was free. She lowered her sweater and sat back down. Then I met Harold at a restaurant where I was working nights. He was charming. He had money. He promised me stability, marriage, a future. I was 19 and desperate to believe that love existed for someone like me. Within 3 months, he showed me his true self. But by then, he had isolated me from the few friends I had made. He controlled my phone, my money, my movements. He told me no one would believe me if I reported him because he had connections, police officers who owed him favors, lawyers in his family's firm, money that could destroy any credibility I might have. Vincent remained silent, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window. I stayed for 8 years, Aria continued. Not because I loved him. Because I was afraid. Because I had believed his lies so many times that I could not tell the difference between fear and love. When I was 26, I became pregnant. I thought that would change him. I thought a child would make him want to be better. Instead, Ava's crying triggered him. He hurt me more during my pregnancy than at any point before. She paused. The sound of the city at night filtered through the windows, distant sirens, the rumble of a late-night delivery truck, the endless hum of Manhattan never truly asleep. After Ava was born, I finally understood that I was teaching her that violence was normal. That love meant pain. That women deserved what men gave them. So I left. I took my daughter and $5 was all I had hidden away, and I walked out at midnight on a Tuesday. I have been running ever since. Working double shifts, living in shelters, moving every time he found us. That is how I became a maid at the Ashford Hotel. That is how I was there the night I saw him hurting that boy, the teenager he and his crew were beating in the alley. Aria's voice grew quieter. I stepped between them because I could not bear to watch another person learn what it means to be powerless. I did not know who Vincent Moretti was. I did not know that my choice would change everything. I only knew that I could not watch violence and do nothing. Vincent turned from the window. His eyes were not filled with pity. Instead, they held something more dangerous, a clarity of purpose, a cold fury directed entirely outward, away from her, toward the people who had designed her suffering. He knelt in front of her chair, and Aria's breath caught because in 15 years of commanding an empire, in 15 years of violent men serving him without question, Vincent Moretti had never knelt for anyone. "You are not what was done to you," he said, his voice low and even like a bell tolling midnight. "You are what you did despite it. You are a woman who stood between a stranger and violence when you had nothing to protect yourself with. You are a mother who chose her child's freedom over her own safety. You are a survivor of the cruelest kind of warfare, and you are still standing." Aria's composure fractured. Tears came like a storm breaking, like a dam failing, like years of held silence finally finding its release. She sobbed, deep, body shaking, animal sounds, and Vincent pulled her against him, his hand steady on her back, careful not to touch the landscape of scars, his presence a shield against the darkness that had chased her across 8 years and 3 cities. Rocco and Theo, positioned in the hallway as they had been every night since Aria arrived, exchanged a look that neither had seen in 15 years of service. Their boss did not comfort people. Their boss did not kneel. Their boss did not hold someone while they fell apart. In that moment, both men understood, the woman upstairs sleeping in the room with star-patterned wallpaper had already changed everything. The next morning, Vincent made 4 phone calls. The first was to Rocco and Theo, instructed to compile every detail of Harold Brennan and Sophie Langford's lives. Bank records, emails, communications, property holdings, associates, criminal connections, everything. The second was to an FBI field agent named Morrison who had been investigating police corruption in the NYPD's 23rd precinct for 14 months. The third was to the Sex White-Collar Crime Division. The fourth was to Don Castellano, patriarch of the family that had been encroaching on Vincent's territory for 2 years. Within 24 hours, Rocco and Theo delivered a file that contained the accumulated sins of 2 people who had believed themselves untouchable. Harold Brennan's crimes: assault on multiple women spanning 14 years, embezzlement from his own company totaling $847,000, money laundering through shell corporations, conspiracy with corrupt police officers, witness intimidation, tax evasion. The psychological evaluation he had purchased from Dr. Price was fraudulent. Price had been paid $15,000 from an account traceable directly to Sophie Langford. Sophie Langford's crimes: securities fraud involving $2.3 million, tax evasion, insider trading on 7 separate occasions, bribery of city officials, wire fraud. Her entire social empire was built on stolen wealth and fabricated credentials. And Harold Brennan had been stealing from the Castellano family for 18 months, skimming money from their shipping operations through a logistics company he secretly controlled. Vincent sent the evidence on Harold to FBI agent Morrison with a single message: "He is yours now." He sent the evidence on Sophie to the SEC and IRS with detailed annotations. And he sent a personal message to Don Castellano: "The woman in my house is under my protection. But I have a gift for you, the man stealing from your family. Here is everything you need. Do with him what you will." At dawn on a Thursday, FBI agents arrived at Harold Brennan's penthouse on the Upper East Side with warrants and cameras rolling. They dragged him from his bed in his silk pajamas, handcuffed him, and perp walked him past news cameras while he screamed about connections and knowing people who would destroy them. No one listened. By evening, he sat in federal holding, awaiting arraignment on charges of assault, embezzlement, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. The federal prosecutor's office had assigned a junior attorney named Sarah Chen, and she was not interested in negotiation. But before Harold could spend his first night in a cell, 3 men in dark suits arrived at the jail with credentials that meant the guards looked away. They escorted him from his holding area into a corridor where no cameras existed, and they placed him in a black SUV that drove into the Manhattan night. Harold Brennan screamed, pleas for mercy, threats about immunity, rage at the indignity. No one answered. The van drove for 40 minutes, turned down a service road into an abandoned warehouse in Red Hook, and then there was only silence and the sound of rain beginning to fall. 3 days later, a fisherman discovered his body in the East River, weighted down, bloated, unrecognizable except for the tattoo on his wrist, a date, the day he was born, that the coroner used for identification. Justice delivered, swift and final, without trial or appeal. Sophie Langford was arrested at the Metropolitan Gala, Manhattan's most exclusive charity event, in front of senators and celebrities and billionaires. SEC agents presented warrants and read her rights as cameras flashed and society's elite watched the fall of their peer. Her designer dress, her Cartier diamonds, her champagne smile, all of it became evidence of fraud. She screamed that it was impossible, that there had been a mistake, that she had done nothing wrong. The agents ignored her. As they led her away, she looked toward the crowd expecting rescue from her friends. They turned away. Federal prison, 40 years minimum. Public disgrace, total. Financial ruin, absolute. The custody hearing was cancelled when Harold's arrest made international headlines. The judge reviewing Aria's case read the news coverage and made a notation in the file: case dismissed due to complainant's criminal charges and fraudulent submission of psychological evaluation. All claims against respondent are without merit. Aria received the letter on a Tuesday morning, the court's official seal at the top, the words cascading down like rain clearing a sky fouled by storm clouds. She stood in the kitchen reading it 3 times, not believing, not daring to believe, until the meaning finally settled into her chest. She was not losing Ava. She would not lose Ava. The court had seen through the lies. Justice, actual justice, had arrived not through the system but through a man who had learned long ago that sometimes the law moves too slowly for the people who need it most. Aria sank into a chair and wept, different tears this time, tears of relief so complete they felt like drowning in reverse, like surfacing after years underwater, lungs finally able to breathe. Vincent found her there an hour later. He did not ask what had happened. He already knew. But he waited while she composed herself, while she wiped her eyes and straightened her spine, while she stood and looked directly at him for the first time since that night on the rooftop when she had stood at the edge of the darkness and chosen instead to fight. "I need time," Aria said, her voice steady now, carrying a strength that had not been there before. To rebuild myself. To stand on my own 2 feet without needing rescue. To become more than what was done to me. Vincent nodded, understanding what cost those words had demanded. I will be here when you are ready. The slow burn continued through November and December, months of Aria finishing her degree online, working in the brownstone as she had promised, Ava thriving in the private school Vincent had enrolled her in, her nightmares finally fading, her smile returning without shadow. Small gestures accumulated, Vincent teaching Aria self-defense at midnight in the basement gym, their hands brushing as she served him coffee, conversations about loss where neither spoke too much but both understood the weight of what had been carried. Rocco and Theo watched their boss transform into someone they barely recognized, someone capable of gentleness, someone who smiled when Ava showed him her drawings, someone who looked at Aria as if she was the most precious thing that had ever entered his world. In 15 years of service, they had never seen him like this. Outside the brownstone, the city moved forward, indifferent to the small revolutions happening in private rooms. But inside those walls, in the space between November and the new year, Aria Wells was becoming someone new, not a victim survivor, but a woman who had taken her own story back from the people who tried to write it for her. And Vincent Moretti, the man who commanded empires through fear, was learning that the greatest power exists not in the ability to destroy, but in the willingness to protect, not because obligation demanded it, but because love had finally found him in the darkness. 6 months had passed since the night Aria Wells stood in Vincent Moretti's study with her hands trembling and her heart finally, impossibly, open. The brownstone on the Upper East Side gleamed with the soft glow of late afternoon light filtering through tall windows. Outside, November had surrendered to the promise of spring, the streets below alive with the kind of movement that only New York possessed. Inside, on the 3rd floor landing, Aria paused before knocking on the heavy oak door to Vincent's study, her hand raised, fingers hesitant. She was not the same woman who had arrived at this house 6 months ago. The green dress she wore draped without clinging, sleeveless, revealing the pale scars on her shoulders and arms that she no longer hid beneath layers of shame. Her dark hair fell loose past her shoulders instead of pulled tight. Her eyes held something they had not held before, the quiet certainty of someone who had climbed out of hell and survived it on her own terms. She knocked. "Come in." Vincent's voice was exactly as it always was, deep, solid like an oath, but the way he looked up from his desk when she entered, the way his breath seemed to catch for just a fraction of a second, made the whole room shift. He stood slowly, the fading light catching the silver at his temples, the sharp line of his jaw. 52 years old but carrying those years like a man who had earned every single one through blood and loss and the terrible weight of absolute power. "You are early," he said. "Ava wanted to show you her chess moves before dinner." Aria stepped inside, and the door closed softly behind her. "She beat Rocco 3 times this week." A smile touched his mouth, genuine, unguarded, a smile that would have shocked anyone who knew Vincent Moretti from the streets. "Rocco is letting her win." "Rocco is afraid of her," Aria corrected. "As he should be." Vincent moved around the desk, crossing the study with the measured grace that characterized every movement he made. He stopped close enough that Aria could smell wood smoke and aged whiskey, the scent of his world mixing with hers. "What?" she asked, noticing how his eyes moved across her face, her shoulders, taking in the woman she had become. "You are extraordinary," he said quietly. The air between them shifted, a door opening to a room they had both been standing outside of, waiting, neither willing to step through without the other's permission. They stood like that for a moment, the silence filled with the ticking of the clock on the mantel and the muffled sounds of the city beyond the windows. Then Vincent extended his hand, and Aria took it, and they walked downstairs together to where Ava was already at the dining table, her small face bright with anticipation, already eager to show him how she had conquered the night's opening. Dinner passed in the comfortable rhythm that 6 months of Sunday nights had created, Ava's voice bright and fast, jumping between topics like a bird from branch to branch. Vincent asking questions with genuine interest, his full attention on the 7-year-old girl who had learned to call him Uncle Vincent and trust that he would stay. Rocco and Theo moved in and out with the meal, and if they noticed the way Vincent watched Aria across the table, the way his hand occasionally moved as if he wanted to reach for hers but held back. They said nothing. They had learned long ago that what happened inside these walls was sacred, protected, untouchable. By 9 o'clock, Ava's eyes were heavy. Aria carried her upstairs to the guest bedroom, her bedroom now, though she still maintained her own apartment, still insisted on maintaining the pieces of her independence that Vincent had learned, painfully, mattered more than anything. She tucked the blankets around her daughter and kissed the top of her head, breathing in the sweetness of her, the impossible miracle that Ava was safe, that she was here, that this was real. When she came back downstairs, Vincent was waiting in his study. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting shadows and gold light across the leather chairs and the walls lined with books. He held out a glass of wine, red, expensive, a vintage she had learned to recognize. "Sit," he said, and Aria did. They sat for a long moment without speaking. The fire spoke for them, the sound of flames consuming wood, the soft crack and pop of burning. Then Aria turned to him. "I never thanked you properly. You owed me nothing." "I owe you my life," she said, and her voice was steady, not trembling. "Ava's life. But that is not why I am here tonight." She set down her glass and stood, walking to where he sat today. The vulnerability in her eyes was a choice now, not a wound. "I spent 6 months rebuilding myself so I could stand here and say this as your equal, not as someone you saved. I am in love with you, Vincent Moretti. Not because you protected me, but because you saw me when I was invisible to everyone else." Vincent rose slowly, closing the distance between them. His hand came up to her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with a tenderness that seemed impossible in a man whose hands had ordered violence, commanded empires through fear. "I have loved you since the moment you stood bleeding in the diner and asked for coffee with $5 to your name," he said quietly. "I waited because I needed you to choose me freely, not out of gratitude or fear." When he kissed her, it was slow and careful, like two people who had survived hell and finally found the coordinates of home. In the hallway, Rocco and Theo exchanged a look and quietly closed the study door, grins breaking across their faces. In 15 years of service, they had never believed their boss would settle down. They had been wrong about many things, but they were learning to live with being wrong about this one. 2 weeks later, everything changed again. Ava's private school sat on a tree-lined street in the Upper West Side, a place of manicured lawns and security that Vincent had paid for personally. Aria picked her up at 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, exactly as she did every Thursday, her hand finding Ava's as they walked toward the car. 3 men in dark coats approached from across the street. Aria recognized the look of them immediately, the same look Harold Brennan's men had carried, the same hunger and calculation. She pulled Ava closer. One man reached into his coat. Aria did not think. She had spent months learning to trust her body, to understand that her hands and her mind and her will were weapons Vincent had taught her to wield. She pushed Ava behind her, hard, fast, and stepped forward. The knife came out. The man lunged. Aria pivoted left, grabbed his wrist with both hands, twisted using the momentum of his own attack. The blade redirected, meant to catch her shoulder instead of Ava's small body, and the sharp white-hot pain that bloomed across her flesh was the most beautiful pain she had ever felt because it meant her daughter was still alive. She disarmed him with a move Vincent had taught her in the basement gym at midnight, his body behind hers, his hands showing her where strength lived. The man crashed to the pavement. The other two hesitated, just for a second, and that second was enough. Vincent's team materialized from the surrounding blocks like shadows taking form. Black SUVs, men in dark suits, the machinery of his protection moving with the precision of an army. Aria felt her legs give way. Her shoulder burned. Blood spread across her white blouse like a flower blooming. Vincent was there, pulling her against his chest, his face white with a terror she had never seen in him before. "Aria?" "I am okay," she whispered. "She is safe." Ava was crying, and Aria reached back with her good arm, her palm finding her daughter's cheek. "Mama is okay. Mama is okay." The paramedics arrived. The wound was not deep, not life-threatening, but the moment was everything, the way Vincent's hand never left hers, not in the ambulance, not in the hospital, not through the stitches and the bandages and the hours of waiting. His men saw their untouchable boss sitting beside a hospital bed, holding the hand of a woman with a bandaged shoulder, and they understood something essential had shifted. She was not under his protection. She was his equal, his partner, his future. 3 months later, on a rooftop overlooking the city, with snow beginning to fall and Ava dancing below at their engagement party, Vincent slipped a ring onto Aria's finger. Simple. Perfect. A single diamond. She looked at him, this man who had commanded empires through fear and learned that the greatest power exists not in destruction, but in protection offered freely, in love that waits, that sees, that believes. I spent 29 years believing I was nothing, Aria said softly. But I was wrong. I am extraordinary. I am strong. And I am choosing you, Vincent Moretti, not because you saved me, but because together we are unbreakable. They kissed as the snow fell, winter surrendering to the promise of spring. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video if you believe in second chances. Subscribe because tomorrow we are bringing you another story of survival and love that refuses to quit. Comment below and tell us which moment hit hardest. Remember, you are not what was done to you. You are what you do next. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only love can do that. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.